Hey, how's it going? This is Dan from modular.dev. We're going to continue on the series that we've been doing the last couple weeks, and that is web development for the absolute beginner. So last week we started talking about images and how to get images on your website, and we ran into a little problem with loading equals lazy. So I just want to show you, I did some digging around afterwards to figure out why it didn't work, and once I figured it out, it was a pretty simple mistake, but I'll explain kind of what happened. So if you recall, loading equals lazy is what happens if you put that on an image. It basically won't download that image until it needs to be downloaded. There's different algorithms that the browser is used to do that, but at the end of the day, Google Chrome or Edge or whatever browser you're using is not supposed to download those images unless they need to do so. And maybe you're getting close to that spot on the screen. So if I run it right now, I gave each one of these a height of 2000 pixels, which means that a lot of these are going to be towards the bottom of the page. Let's go ahead and just run it, and I'll open up my network panel, and we'll refresh this just so you can see what's happening on the network panel. And actually, I think I have something cached. There we go. So if I did that, you'll notice that it loaded all four of these images, even though I put loading equal lazy on the bottom too. And the reason it does that is because although we set a height, it doesn't know the width of these images until it starts downloading them. So it doesn't know if it's going to be able to show them all horizontally, if that makes sense, like one right next to each other, just really tall images. It doesn't know if that's an option. So because it doesn't know, it's going to load those lazy ones just in case. So what we can do is we can specify display block on this, which is going to make them go for sure onto the next line. And we're going to go over display block and all of the ways to position your elements today. So this is a good introduction to display block. But basically what this is going to do is say, okay, there's no way that this image can be right next to another one horizontally. It's going to be vertically right next to them. So each one of these is going to be 2000 pixels, which means this one, at the very least, isn't going to come on until 6000 pixels, which is quite a ways down the page. So let's go ahead and refresh this. And now, if you notice, I did not load the bottom two images, the ones that had loading equal lazy on. So that was the expected behavior, and if you think about what actually was going on behind the scenes, it makes sense. Chrome did not know if it was going to be displayed horizontally. So as we scroll down the page, you'll see these other images start getting downloaded. And there we go. So that was how loading equal lazy works. And on a full featured website, it should work a little bit better than our previous example. And normally you're going to, and I guess I probably should say this, in general, put loading equals lazy if you think it's going to be, outside of the viewport of the screen when it loads. Whether or not the Chrome actually loads it lazily, that's kind of up to Chrome, but just as a general rule, go ahead and put that on there for any images outside of the initial viewport. All right, so that's all for last week. This week we're going to go over display and position. Both of those are CSS attributes, so we're not going to really learn too many new HTML things today, although I will show you a couple new tags just because, and you can kind of get ready to use them on a different project or something like that. So anyways, the two tags I want to show you today is the section tag, and this is basically saying, okay, I have a new section of the website, and inside there I'm going to make an article, which is basically just telling the browser, okay, the following things are part of an article. And these are just containers. There's nothing that's going to be really displayed because of these. That they're just containers for what we're going to put in them. So let's go ahead and just put a little bit of a text, maybe a paragraph in here. I'll just put some words, and I'll go ahead and duplicate that line. So we have a section with 3 articles, and each article has its own text. So if we run this now, let's see what it looks like. You'll notice they're one on top of each other. And why is that? Well, we can look here and go to inspect, and if we go to the article element, and then we scroll to the styles area, we're going to see that Google Chrome by default gives article display block. So what is display block? We talked about it a little bit just at the beginning of the video in terms of images, but really it's putting things vertical, not horizontal. So block basically says go on to the next line. So you can never have 2 items that are display block next to each other unless a parent allows it, which we'll talk about that later. But let's go ahead and just change article to display inline. And now we'll refresh the page. Okay, and what is the problem? Well, the problem is that the paragraph underneath is display block as well. So let's put paragraph as display inline as well. Hopefully that should do it. Okay, and now you see that now instead of vertically, they're horizontally next to each other. So this article, and this article, they're all still there. And maybe what I'll do, just to make it a little bit more obvious, is I'll put a little bit of a background color on each one, just so you can see. So this first one, I'm going to put a background color of, sure, aqua. And this next one, let's go ahead and put a different background color. Maybe we'll put orange. And maybe for this one, we'll put pink. Now if we refresh the page, we can see where each one of them start and end. So that's the difference between display inline and display block. Inline, they're right next to each other. So what other options do we have? We have inline block as well. Let's go ahead and see what that does. So inline block is very similar to inline, but there's a pretty big difference. And if I refresh now, you'll notice that they just gained a lot of height. And why is that? That's because the paragraph here by default has a margin of 1 EM and 1 EM at the bottom. So basically there's a little bit of margin on the top and bottom. And so why didn't that display when we were doing display inline? That's because display inline doesn't follow the traditional rules of block-based layouts. So you can't give it a height. You can't give it like margins and paddings and things like that. It's mainly just for displaying inline text. So for this paragraph, we've got a little bit of margin on the top and on the bottom. And one other thing you will notice too is that there's a little bit of a space now in between each one. So where did that come from? So when you have inline items, any space that you may have in your HTML code gets ignored. So if you think about it, there's actually a little bit of space between this top line, line 17 here, and this next line, line 18. There's actually quite a few spaces, probably 10 or so. And so HTML doesn't allow you to have multiple spaces right next to each other. You would have to put this symbol if you wanted to have multiple spaces. But one of those is getting rendered. So if we delete all these spaces and put it on the line with it, it's kind of a really long line, but you'll see now that the space will go away. And there it is, it's gone on that one. We did not change this next one, so that space is still there. So display inline and display inline block are very similar. Just think of it in terms of block-based layout. Would you give a margin or a padding or a height to something? If you want to do that, then you're going to have to use inline block. Otherwise, inline is fine. I use inline block mostly. I don't really use inline that much. But let's go ahead and I want to show you something else. Let's go ahead and switch now from inline block to the very simplest one, which is display none. Display none, as you might guess, is going to hide all of these from the screen. So that's a pretty easy one. So the question then becomes, does it still take up space on the document? Let's say we had something else underneath here. Would causing display none, would this go up to the top of the screen, or would there be some kind of blank space above it? And the answer is that there is no blank space above it. It kind of looks like a blank space here, but I'm gonna just delete it just so you can see. If I deleted it, it wasn't there. The space that we're seeing is because the paragraph itself has a margin on it. So if I delete it from there, or if it's there, it doesn't matter. Display none takes it completely off the screen. And we'll just do one other thing just so you can kind of see. Visibility hidden, I believe, is slightly different. So if you look now, this got pushed down quite a bit. The articles are still there, but they are hidden. So that's the difference between display none and visibility hidden. So what other display items, or what other display options do we have? We have display grid, which is one of my favorite ones. I use it all the time. So I'll show you what that is right now. Let's go ahead and for each of these, well, let's do this. Let's get rid of this. And let's have each article be display block. And each article will have a height of 300 pixels, just so you can kind of see it pretty good. And the section around it, because we have this section around all of our articles. I'm going to move this other article back to the next line. This section here, we're going to put a display grid on it. Whoops. Section, display grid. And what is display grid? Well, let's talk about that for a second. So if you wanted to maybe align three things on, well, let me open up Paint. I don't think it's going to be that great of a image here, but you'll get the picture, I think, what I'm trying to say. So let's go ahead and say you wanted three items like this on your screen. What would the easiest way to do that be? Well, you'd have a few options, but really this, if you think about it, this is a 3-column grid. You know, and then maybe you'd want to wrap it to the next line when it got to 3. So it's a 3-column grid, and you know, however many rows it needs, and it could just keep going on and on and on. So the easiest way to demonstrate that in HTML is just using display grid, and this is a fairly new thing, and it really changed the way we lay out things in HTML. So if you're just learning now, this is a great time to learn display grid, get familiar with it, and then you don't have to worry about some of the other headaches that we used to have to deal with in web development. So let's go ahead and put grid template columns, and this is basically saying how many columns do you want and what size should each of those columns be. So if I put, let's say 400 pixels, 400 pixels, 400 pixels, that means 3 columns, each one of them being 400 pixels wide, I should say. The height of that column is going to depend on whatever the tallest thing in there is. Let's go ahead and run this, see how it looks. All right. So we can see here that this article is 400 pixels wide. If you look, there's a little bit of a, if I move my mouse, you're not going to be able to see it, but over at the bottom, kind of like the middle left section of the screen, it says 400 by 300. Same thing here, and same thing here. So each one of these is 400 by 300. We can scroll over and see them. So this display grid basically said, okay, we're going to have 3 columns, 400 pixels each, which is great. Now, what if you want to put a little bit of space in between each one? Well, you can use grid gap. And maybe you want 20 pixels of space in between each column. And there you go. We got 20 pixels of space in between each one. And if I make this just a 2-column grid now, so it's 400 pixels, 400 pixels, and I refresh, now you'll see we also have 20 pixels of space here. I go into more in-depth on CSS Grid in a different video that I already made. I'll show it to you right here, but I linked to it in the description. So definitely feel free to check that out if you want to learn more about display grid. But that's a really common way that you're going to use to lay out your things on a page. All right. Now there are other ones too. There's display flex and display table, and there's more as well. But for the most part, inline block, and grid are going to be what you're going to use, or what I use anyways, to make websites. So definitely get familiar with those. So let's go ahead and I'm going to make this section here. Let's talk about something else. What if I wanted to put, well, let's just put this back to how it was. Let's just look here. What if I wanted to put a little bit of a X or something in the top right corner of each of these articles? You could think of it as like a close button if this was a modal that was opened up, a little bit of X or something like that. How could you do that? Well, you may be able to use one of the techniques we talked about, but more than likely you're going to want to use positioning to do that. So let's go ahead and I'm going to delete these other 2 articles because I don't really care about them now. And now inside this article we have our paragraph tag, and we're going to add another tag here. We'll just call it a button, and I'll just put X. And you'll learn about buttons when we get to forums and things like that, but this basically just puts a button on the screen. That's not really necessary for you to know, but we're just going to use this button to position it in the top right of this article. Okay, so we can go ahead and get rid of this. I'll put a width of 400 pixels on this article. So if we run it right now, we have, oops, refresh. We have this article that's 400 pixels wide and 300 pixels tall, and we have this close button, or this X button, that's right here. And we want that to go on the top right of the screen. However, we have a paragraph that takes up the entire line. So what can we do? We could modify the paragraph a little bit to make it so it doesn't take up that amount of width, but that's not the best way to do this. The best way to do this is to position this button up there at the top. So what we can do, if we go to button, we can say position absolute. And where do we want to absolute position this? We want to put it on the top, and we want to put it on the right. So the very top right. 0 just stands for 0 pixels. You can leave out the pixels if you want to, but I'll put it in there for clarity. So we're going to put it on the very top right of the article. Now this in itself isn't going to work. I'll show you in just a second what happens. Right now it's going to put it on the top right of the page. But that is interesting because this button is technically inside this article, and we just got it to put it way up there. So maybe that's what you want to do. But let's see if we can position it inside this article. And to do that, we're going to put position relative on the article itself. So we have position absolute, and that tells the element where it's going to go relative to this parent, this article here. So relative and absolute are two ones that go together a lot. And let's go ahead and refresh. And now you'll see the button is positioned in the top right of the article. So that is great. Let's go ahead and talk about what if we wanted something to be always on the screen. Let's just have a little bit of a let's see. We want this paragraph always visible, and we're going to put a bunch of articles underneath it so that we get a scroll bar. Okay. Alright, so right now always visible is at the top, but when we start scrolling it is gone. So how do we make it so always visible is always visible? Well, what we can do is we can add a I have to put it down here because I don't want all my paragraphs to be that way. So I'm going to inline this one. We want to put a style of position fixed here. And fixed means this is going to be, instead of now relative to another element, this is going to be relative to the screen. So this thing is going to be, let's put it at the top and at the left of the screen. And it's kind of hard to see because it's behind those ones now. Let me put it on the right side so you can see it a little better. There it is here on the right side, and it's always visible no matter where I scroll. So that is position fixed. Now there's one other thing that you may want to use, and that would be position sticky. And position sticky basically is going to say we want it to be in the normal flow of the page, but we want it to be sticky to the top or the bottom once it would go off the page. Let's see if I have an example of that. This is a website that I work on here, and you'll notice that this now is sticky to the top of the page. Actually, probably a better one though would be another website that I work on. This is right now on the kind of middle part of the page, but as you scroll, now all of a sudden it's sticky to the top. So this may be something that you want to do. So I'll show you how you can do that. This position sticky, and we're going to put we'll put a top of 0 on that. But let's go ahead and put it maybe here or something like that. And we'll give it a background. Well, how about this? We'll give it a z index of 1, and we'll talk about what z index is in just a second. And I'll give it a background color of orange. So I'm just doing this so that it makes it obvious where it is on the page. Let's go ahead and run this. Oh, it's already running. Whoops. Okay. So here is my thing that I want to sticky to the top of the page. And now if you'll notice, it is sticky to the top. When I scroll past and it would go off the page, now it's stuck to the top of the page. So that is how that works. And so what z-index is, if I don't have this on there, and I'll refresh now, it's going to be stuck to the top of the page, but you'll notice the element behind it or in front of it is going to be overlapping it, which is not usually what you want. So z-index, if you think of a three-dimensional plane, you have your x, y, and z coordinates. Z-index is going to change like how close it is to you. So if I put a z-index of 1 on that, and if I refresh, by default, everything else has a z-index of 0, I think. So z-index of 1 is saying, okay, this is going to be closer to you than everything else. So that's what that is. And there's other positions too. If you want, I did link to them in the description. For the display ones that we were talking about before, I linked to W3 Schools. Normally I like MDN better, but their page for display was a little bit confusing to me, so I linked to the W3 School ones. But for position, you'll notice they're talking about static, which is the default, relative, we learned about that, absolute, fixed, sticky. Actually, that is all of them. I guess static was the only one we didn't learn, but that was the default one that elements normally have. So that's the different ways to position and display items on your screen. And as I said before, display does have a lot more options for you. You got, we talked about inline block, and grid, but there's a whole bunch of other ones. So definitely check those out if that interests you. But I think between that, or between the display things and the positioning, you should at least have a good way of positioning and displaying things on your websites now that you can use. So I think next time we're going to go over some more HTML elements. Probably we'll talk about the section in the article, divs, when do you use certain elements versus other ones. So I hope you enjoyed this, and let me know if you have any questions or comments throughout the week, and definitely check out our next one next week. All right, thanks.